You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. Joining us right now is someone who knew Congressman John Lewis very well. He is an icon himself. He is one of the founders of the Nashville movement, one of our greatest leaders, Reverend Jim Lawson. Reverend Lawson, always glad to talk with you. Welcome to Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Thank you.
Very solemn occasion, obviously, in Washington, D.C. With some video earlier where you had walked arm in arm at one of those marches. You were there with him, if I'm correct, in March of this year when he took his last walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, correct?
Yes, that's right.
What your fondest memory of Congressman Lewis, and what was it about him that made him so effective?
So what?
So effective.
Well, I think the key to John Lewis is to be found in his early life, growing up near Troy, Alabama, the son, one of 10 children, offsprings of his parents who were sharecroppers, and all 10 children, of course, worked on the farm to make a living. But at an early age, it's clear to me from reading his books and all, as well as from watching him and being close to him. I met him in 1958 in the ground floor of the movement that he and I call the Nonviolent Movement of America. We do not call it the Civil Rights Movement. Anyway, so the key was that John knew by the time he was 12 or 15 that the life his parents and his sisters and brothers had to live as sharecroppers in Alabama was against God's will, was unnecessary, and was a form of torture and hatred. That as well as they endured and as well as they struggled with it, that it was wrong. They had to do their best in the middle of a huge wrong system. So I think the key to John is to understand that he was looking from age 15 at least for the way he could spend his life dismantling that system. And Martin King gave him an immediate option with the Montgomery bus boycott. And Martin King, that he heard in that teen period of his life, gave him an understanding of a religious perspective, especially the role of Jesus. And then when he came to Nashville, and we in Nashville were launching the first major campaign to desegregate the nation. Our goal was to desegregate the Nashville downtown. That was the goal. C.T. Vivian was in on that decision, Kelly Miller Smith, Dolores Wilkerson, Janetta Hayes, Andrew White, I could name a number of others. But we determined systematically we were going to desegregate downtown Nashville, which was a huge goal, and no one had ever set that as a civil rights goal. But the black women who very often were the greater victims of segregation and racism, were the ones who helped us decide to make that our goal. And this then reshaped the whole movement and the aspirations, and black people across the country just worked at getting access, jobs, getting the vicious signs out, stopping the no-colored, white-only stuff, and no Negro should be in this town after sunset. All of that stuff that was across the country, and so that essentially was the King Rosa Parks movement, because Nashville set the example, and then Albany, Georgia, used our plan and went to work on desegregating downtown Albany, Georgia. The Freedom Ride could not have happened if our Nashville movement had not determined that we could not let violence of any kind stop the movement. And Birmingham in 63 and so forth and so on. So John found in our preparation and careful study and strategizing in Nashville, the things that changed his life, that saved his life. He actually says in his memoir that I changed his life, but I maintain it wasn't that. I had spent 10 years studying nonviolent struggle and understanding it in the light of Christian faith and Gandhi, who presented it in the 20th century, and John grabbed those ideas so fast, made them his own.
That is again, you obviously older than him. Reverend C.T. Vivian at the time was also older, and the thing that when I was talking to Ambassador Andrew Young, to point that you just said, he said that John Lewis absolutely fundamentally believed with every fiber of his being in the non-violent aspect of the movement. He said that he embodied it.
It has to be understood that one of the things I taught across the South was that Jesus was a nonviolent force. that Jesus' behavior in life was a declaration that there could be a godly order on earth that could be produced by and through the power of the life force and the power of love. So that's one of the very first pieces of work that I did in preparation of people, in helping people to understand what Montgomery bus boycott was about and how it could be translated into new campaigns. So John adopted that understanding of the Christian faith in Jesus. And one of the things I wish that in this period of time we would understand through John's death is that he was a man of faith and of Jesus-oriented faith, and that so much of Christianity in the United States is false religion and bad religion concerning Jesus, and so that the nation has an option to select, have you got good religion? And John Lewis had good religion.
To that particular point, we're seeing what's happening in Portland right now. We're seeing these protests happen all across the country. I've had reporters calling me, people asking me as well, my thoughts on the actions happening there. Others are saying that there are provocateurs who are doing this thing on purpose. And not you speaking for him, but knowing him well and also speaking for yourself. What would John Lewis and what would Reverend Lawson say to these protesters in Portland, to say to protesters in Seattle, and to others where there are critics of these violent clashes?
Well, the press does not report it very well, I would have to say to you.
Mm-hmm.
First instance, the violence in the United States, including the police shooting of George Floyd, is what I call the most violent culture in the world. And almost all of us Americans are weaned on the historic violence of the United States that continues on this very day. So that's number one. The police violence is a symptom of that culture of violence in our society.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who want to do looting, and the people out of some of the anarchist groups that I have visited with in a number of parts of the country, probably for 30, 40 years. They are all the progenitors of the culture of violence. That cannot be blamed on BLM, because BLM, I've heard the founders, and I've watched many of the demonstrations for the last 3 months. BLM operates out of, essentially, a nonviolent portrayal. Mm. So that violence that we see in Seattle is especially atrocious, because I have had arguments with young men, especially, and young white men on the West Coast for years, decades now, who maintain that in demonstrations you need to hand wrestle with the police. Well, that's stupidity. In preparing for the Nashville campaign in 1959-60, one of the illustrations I used was that the police are not the issue. Injustice is the issue. The racism is the issue. And that you cannot, that no unit of in the United States has the power to beat up and stop a police force in Nashville or Seattle. And if you develop that much firepower and physical force that you could defeat the police of Seattle, then you would immediately have to deal with the state police and the National Guard, and you don't have the physical powers or the weaponry to stop the National Guard from defeating you. And if you could have enough violence to defeat the National Guard, you could not defeat the United States Navy or Army or Air Force or Marine Corps or Coast Guard people. And so to even play with the idea of violence is a form of perpetuating the injustice you claim you detest.
Last question for you. I hear this a lot. People say, what are we going to do now since we've lost Congressman John Lewis, and we lost Reverend C.T. Vivian, and then in March, Reverend Joseph Lowry, in September, Juanita Abernathy, and there's so many, of course, these iconic figures who have transitioned from elders to ancestors. And what I say to them is, they did their part. Now, if you had paid any attention to them while they were living and listened to them, you now have to do your job. It is the continuum that we've always had in our community, where elders, where folks go from being young to being veterans, to being elders, to transition to ancestors, and then that next generation comes right behind and picks up and continues to do the work and run their own race.
Well, social movements are evolutionary. And I would say to you that already, as I've watched the present demonstrations across our country 2020, those demonstrations have already surpassed what we did in John Lewis and Juanita and others of us were able to promote in the 20th century. And also the issue of racist violence as demonstrated through the government and through the police is an issue that while we were aware of it all the time, it's only because in the 21st century that issue can become the focus issue. The prisons and racist structures. Now, those issues were always present in the 20th century. But the progress can't be overturned or cannot be established in one night or one movement. And a 300 and 400 year process of racism and injustice cannot be overturned and cannot even be seen in a single campaign. Mm-hmm. So I maintain, I look at what I see, and I've talked with BLM people here locally by Zoom and whatnot, and I've tried to study what's happening across the country. And this is, in my mind, the first massive movement in the 21st century, and there must be many of them in many different fields. It is time for white people and some white leadership to emerge to do major nonviolent campaigns against homelessness, against the poverty that is structured poverty. 140 million people, most of them working people, the Poor People's Campaign says, are in poverty, and most of them are working people. Their wages are just another form of slavery, while this nation accumulates wealth for the wealthy in enormous categories. So it's really time for some white male leadership to emerge that goes after some of these structured forms of cruelty in our country. Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Great point. No. I was just listening to you.
Okay.
I was letting you do your thing.
That's my point. If they would do like the BLM is doing on wages, and here Microsoft produces a number of people who are massive billionaires, and the ordinary workers in Microsoft have very, very modest or immodest wages. Amazon the same way. Walmart the same way. So it's time for white leadership in this country to step forward and go after the economic greed that is causing so much poverty in our country, is the source of the poverty.
Indeed.
So instead of looking at BLM critically, which has produced a great piece of work by getting the nation to look at the execution of innocent people, and I use execution rather than murder because it's governmental power that without trial, without indictment, without gathering any evidence, George Floyd is killed without indictment, without trial, without conviction. He is executed, not murdered, and he's executed by state power.
Reverend Jim,
it is time for the nation to stop it.
Reverend Jim Lawson, always a pleasure talking with you.
You take care.
We appreciate your wisdom,
Thanks for
sir.
having me.
Thank you very much.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one
It's
moment.
time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.